Being alone can feel good at first. You get space to think. You get time to focus on yourself. You get freedom to live without compromise. But the longer a man stays alone, the more subtle changes begin. Changes he might not even notice. It's not dramatic. It's not obvious. It happens quietly, day by day. And these changes can shape not just how he sees others, but how he sees himself. The tricky part is that these changes don't happen all at once. They start small, almost harmless. A little less talking, a little more self-reliance, a little more comfort in silence. Step by step, they build into patterns. And before he knows it, being alone isn't just a choice. It becomes a way of life. In this video, we are going to break down 8 clear ways being alone for too long can affect a man's life, his habits, and even himself. Number 1. He learns how to live without anyone. When a man stays alone for a long time, he gets used to handling everything by himself. At first, this feels empowering. He solves his own problems. He makes his own decisions. He doesn't have to explain himself to anyone. Over time, this becomes normal. But slowly, something else happens. He stops expecting anyone to be there. He stops including people in his life, not because he dislikes them, but because he no longer thinks of connection as necessary. Independence turns into distance. Distance turns into habit. And without realizing it, he builds a life where other people no longer fit easily. He plans his days assuming no one else is involved. If something goes wrong, he doesn't think about calling anyone. If something good happens, there's no one he feels the need to tell. Even small forms of support start to feel strange. Help feels unnecessary. Advice feels intrusive. Concern from others feels awkward instead of comforting. He becomes emotionally self-contained. Everything stays inside. Thoughts, struggles, plans, fears, all handled alone, all processed quietly. And at some point, being needed by someone else doesn't feel meaningful anymore. It feels inconvenient. This is the quiet danger. Not that he becomes weak, but that he becomes too complete on his own. So complete that making space for another person feels like disruption. So used to standing alone that leaning on someone feels unnatural. And once a man reaches this stage, even when he wants connection, he no longer knows where to place it in his life. Number 2. Talking to people starts to feel like work. Social skills don't disappear overnight. They fade quietly. A man who spends too much time alone starts talking less, sharing less, reacting less. Conversations feel awkward, not because he's bad at them, but because he's out of practice. He thinks more before speaking. He worries about saying the wrong thing. He feels tired after social interactions that used to feel normal, so he avoids them. Not because he hates people, but because being alone has become easier than reconnecting. Small talk starts to feel pointless. He doesn't know where to enter conversations anymore. Jokes don't come naturally. Responses feel delayed or forced. He becomes more comfortable observing than participating. He listens more than he speaks. He stays quiet even when he has something to say. Not out of confidence, but out of caution. Over time, silence becomes his default setting. Speaking feels like effort. Explaining himself feels exhausting. Being misunderstood feels likely. So he chooses quiet, not because it's better, but because it requires less energy. This is how connection slowly weakens. Not through rejection, but through withdrawal. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to step back in, because the gap between him and others feels wider than it really is. Number 3. Silence becomes too comfortable. At some point, loneliness stops feeling painful. It starts to feel familiar. The quiet no longer bothers him. In fact, it feels safe. There's no tension in silence, no expectations, no interruptions. Days begin to follow the same calm pattern. Wake up, handle responsibilities, return to quiet. And at first, this feels like peace. But comfort has a way of slowly closing things off. When silence becomes too comfortable, curiosity fades. He stops reaching out, stops trying new things, stops putting himself in situations that feel unfamiliar, not because he's afraid, but because nothing is pulling him forward anymore. Discomfort disappears, and so does growth. There's no challenge, no friction, no reason to adjust or adapt. Life becomes predictable, manageable, contained. He begins to protect his quiet. Anything that threatens it feels like a problem. Noise feels irritating. People feel overwhelming. Change feels unnecessary. So he avoids disruption, even when it could be good for him. This is where time starts to blur. Weeks pass quickly. Months feel the same. Nothing marks the difference between one day and the next. He's not unhappy, but he's not moving either. Not out of confidence, but out of caution. Over time, silence becomes his default setting. Speaking feels like effort. Explaining himself feels exhausting. Being misunderstood feels likely. So he chooses quiet, not because it's better, but because it requires less energy. This is how connection slowly weakens, not through rejection, but through withdrawal. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to step back in, because the gap between him and others feels wider than it really is. Number 3, silence becomes too comfortable. At some point, loneliness stops feeling painful. It starts to feel familiar. The quiet no longer bothers him. In fact, it feels safe. There's no tension in silence, no expectations, no interruptions. Days begin to follow the same calm pattern. Wake up, handle responsibilities, return to quiet. And at first, this feels like peace, but comfort has a way of slowly closing things off. When silence becomes too comfortable, curiosity fades. He stops reaching out, stops trying new things, stops putting himself in situations that feel unfamiliar. Not because he's afraid, but because nothing is pulling him forward anymore. Discomfort disappears, and so does growth. There's no challenge, no friction, no reason to adjust or adapt. Life becomes predictable, manageable, contained. He begins to protect his quiet. Anything that threatens it feels like a problem. Noise feels irritating. People feel overwhelming. Change feels unnecessary. So he avoids disruption, even when it could be good for him. This is where time starts to blur. Weeks pass quickly. Months feel the same. Nothing marks the difference between one day and the next. He's not unhappy, but he's not moving either. And without realizing it, the silence that once helped him recover becomes the place where he quietly disappears. Number 4, his thoughts start circling themselves. When a man spends too much time alone, his mind has no resistance, no interruptions, no outside perspective. Thoughts don't move forward anymore. They move in circles. He replays conversations that already ended. He revisits decisions that can't be changed. He imagines outcomes that never happen, not because something is wrong with him, but because there's nothing stopping the loop. Without other voices, his own voice becomes louder. Every doubt echoes longer. Every mistake feels heavier. Every unanswered question sticks around. Small things take on more weight than they should. A look from someone, a short reply, a moment that probably meant nothing. He thinks about it longer than necessary. He assigns meaning where there may be none. His inner world grows, but it loses balance. There's depth, but no contrast. Reflection, but no release. Over time, he starts trusting his thoughts too much. He assumes his interpretations are accurate. He forgets how often perspective changes when shared. This is how overthinking becomes a habit. Not because he's anxious, but because his mind has nowhere else to go. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between clarity and isolation, speaking in his own voice. Number 5, he becomes hard to live with. without knowing it. Living alone for a long time means everything starts to work his way, his schedule, his habits, his pace. At first, this feels efficient. Life runs smoothly. There are no interruptions. But slowly, tolerance begins to drop. Noise feels distracting. Other people's routines feel intrusive. Small changes feel bigger than they should. He gets used to silence, to control, to things staying exactly how he left them. So when someone enters his space, even briefly, he feels unsettled, not angry, not hostile, just uncomfortable. Compromise starts to feel like loss. Adjusting his routine feels like giving something up. Meeting someone halfway feels exhausting. He doesn't say this out loud. He may not even realize it himself. But others can feel it. He seems distant, easily irritated, less patient than before. Not because he wants to be difficult, but because he has lived too long in a world where nothing pushes back. And when life finally does, he struggles to bend. This is how isolation quietly reshapes behavior. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle ones that slowly make connection harder. Number 6. Letting people in starts to feel risky. After years of being alone, a man becomes used to his own space, his thoughts, his routines, his quiet. It feels safe. It feels predictable. And predictability is comfortable. So when someone new tries to get close, it can feel strange. Opening up starts to feel risky. Sharing emotions, thoughts, or personal struggles suddenly seems like exposing a part of himself that he's learned to protect. Even kindness or attention from others can feel unfamiliar or overwhelming. He's built walls, not to punish, but to survive. And those walls are so familiar now that breaking them feels unnatural. He hesitates. He questions motives. He second-guesses even small gestures of care. He fears losing the peace he has worked so hard to maintain. This caution isn't weakness. It's a form of self-preservation. But over time, it becomes a barrier. It stops meaningful relationships from forming. It makes him distant, even when he wants to connect. He pushes people away quietly, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes without even realizing it. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's forgotten how to let anyone truly in. And the longer this continues, the more isolation reinforces itself. Being alone becomes easier than being open. Being distant feels safer than being vulnerable. Eventually, letting someone in doesn't feel like an option. It feels like a risk he's not willing to take. And that risk keeps him trapped in solitude, even if he longs for connection. Number 7. He slowly disconnects from himself. After years of being alone, a man can start to lose touch, not with others, but with himself. He still goes through the motions. He wakes up. He works. He eats. He sleeps. On the outside, everything looks normal. He functions. He survives. But inside, something subtle is happening. Life starts to feel flat. Excitement fades. Motivation fades. Even small pleasures feel less meaningful. He stops dreaming as much. He stops feeling urgency for growth. The goals he once cared about now feel distant, and the man who once had energy, curiosity, or ambition begins to feel like a spectator in his own life. This isn't about weakness or failure. It's a quiet effect of long-term isolation. He hasn't given up consciously. He's just slowly disconnected from the things that once made life feel alive. Even his emotions start to feel muted. Joy doesn't feel as bright. Pain doesn't feel as sharp. He becomes numb, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, almost unnoticed way. The irony is clear. He sought peace and control in solitude, and he got it. But in doing so, he also gave up some of the parts of himself that thrive in connection, energy, passion, and spontaneity. By the time he notices it, the distance is not just from others. It's from life itself, and from the man he used to be. This is the silent danger. Not sudden, not loud, but real. and hard to reverse if ignored for too long. Number 8. Why this is dangerous, but also fixable. The changes we've talked about are subtle, but they add up. A man can survive alone for years. He can become independent, self-sufficient, and quiet. He can even feel comfortable in that silence. But survival is not the same as living fully. When isolation becomes permanent, it slowly erodes connection, curiosity, and emotional balance. It's dangerous not because he fails, but because he doesn't notice what's slipping away. The mind, the heart, and the sense of purpose all need balance. Alone time strengthens the mind. Connection strengthens the heart. Challenge strengthens the spirit. Too much of one without the other creates a gap where a man can feel complete, but incomplete at the same time, functional but disconnected, safe but stagnant. The good news is this: none of this is permanent. Awareness is the first step. Small changes, reaching out, allowing someone in, trying new experiences, or even sharing thoughts aloud, can slowly reverse these patterns. The skills, the emotional openness, the energy that faded over years can return with intention and practice. It's not about rushing. It's not about forcing connection. It's about realizing that silence and solitude are tools, not permanent states. A man can rebuild balance. He can reconnect with himself. He can reconnect with life. He can reconnect with others. And when he does, the quiet he once cherished doesn't trap him anymore. It becomes a space he can step into and step out of freely. If you've been alone for a long time, this video is not telling you that you failed. It's telling you that you adapted. But adaptation can go too far. Being alone can make you stronger. But staying isolated too long can slowly disconnect you from life itself. You don't need to rush. You don't need to change overnight. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to remember that silence is meant to be a place you visit, not a place you disappear into. If this made sense to you, stay with the channel. More honest conversations like this are coming. And if you've been walking alone for a while, this is your reminder that you don't have to stay there forever. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt this way? Comment below with, "I've been here," if you relate, or "Still learning" if you're working through it. Let's start a conversation and share what this journey of solitude has taught us.